Paris in the fall, the last months of the year and the end of the millennium. The city holds many memories for me, of cafes, of music, of love, and of death.
On this day, 20 years ago, on the 30th of September 1996, a game was released, one that would be called a masterpiece by all who played it. That game was Broken Sword: The Shadow of the Templars, a piece of video gaming excellence, a game that showed us exactly how well an adventure game can flow, how well an adventure game can look, and how good a story it can have. When it comes to 2D adventure games, Broken Sword is in a class of its own. The people at Revolution Software managed to carve their names in the gaming history for all time with this title, with a game that succeeds in putting together all the elements needed to make a great experience in just the right amount. You have superb, detailed, hand-drawn graphics with very intricate animations and very beautiful backgrounds. You have music that is just right to fit the theme, changing between dread to humor to adventure to just a sense of relaxation at watching beautiful Paris in the fall. You have a bunch of colorful and memorable characters acted out by very good voice actors. You have dialogue that is funny and witty and a story that sets up a mystery that you feel you need to solve. And most of all, it has very good puzzles. The kind of puzzles that won't make you go hunting for pixels. The kind of puzzles that will just click, that have logic to them. Apart from one of them involving a belly goat in Ireland. The director of the game, Charles Cecil, has a funny story about this puzzle. Some years after the game was released, he was in New York, I believe. He was in a taxi and he started chatting with the driver. The driver asked him, "Hey, so what do you do for a living?" And he said, "Well, I make video games." The driver asked, "Well, what video games do you make?" Cecil said something akin to, "Oh, probably not something you've heard about. It's a game called Broken Sword." And then the driver turned to him and almost yelled at him, "Ah, so you're responsible for that goat puzzle." That was the moment when Charles Cecil realized that Broken Sword had made it big. Yeah, it had sold well. It also had a budget of £1 million in 1996. But to get ingrained into the culture at the point where someone driving a taxi, a random person driving a taxi would know the goat puzzle, that's something amazing. And oh sure, Broken Sword isn't as popular now or ever as something like Call of Duty, and probably not even Monkey Island. But still, it is what I would consider to be a masterpiece of video game design and video game production in general. The game just grabs you from the first seconds. Paris in the fall, the last months of the year and the end of the millennium, that sets up a sort of feeling to the game. Sure, followed by mysteries and murder in Paris, but there is a feeling to it. When it's so entrenched in that period of time. There was a certain kind of cultural mysticism, conspiracy thing. The end of the millennium was something big. Even the old ladies at the corner that were born sometime during the First World War were talking about the end of the millennium. It was something approaching, something that was coming. And Broken Sword latched onto that idea through its story, through its general feeling. I'm not sure if that was intentional or if I'm just projecting onto it what I felt when I was playing it, but that is what it seemed to me. And of course, the ample amount of conspiracy in it certainly helped. At its basis, Broken Sword is a mystery. A mystery that starts off with something that's actually quite kind of a bit current-ish and relevant today, a bombing in Paris. A cafe blown up, A simple tourist caught in a blast, survived, very unscathed, and then wonders what happened. Why did that man in the cafe die? Who killed him? Why? That man's name was George Stobart. A person defined by two characteristics. He has infinite space in his jacket to store things, and he has a memory like a bear trap. Or at least that's what he says. And in this adventure, in this mystery, he is joined by Nicole Collard, who isn't a playable character in the original version of the game. She does become playable in the sequels and in the director's cut version of Shadow of the Templars. I'll get to the director's cut later. Nicole, I wouldn't say she's a sidekick, but she's more than a simple NPC which George sometimes talks to. She has a pivotal role in progressing the story and is one of the central characters, having a connection to the murder that just happened, the bombing, prior to the beginning of the game. They make a very interesting and contrasting duo, around which this entire franchise revolves around. That and the Templars, of course. Ah, the Templars. Apart from Area 51, the Templars are probably one of the best sources for conspiracy fiction ever. You have Dan Brown's books, you have the Assassin's Creed series, and a long time before those you had Broken Sword. Of course, they do have similar sources of inspiration like the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, but still there are certain similarities in themes, in characters, in events that mirror things that happen in Broken Sword. And what does happen? Oh, a lot of things. I don't actually want to give you any spoilers on the off chance that you haven't played it yet. I'll just say that it is a very well told story that teaches you a lot about the history of the Templars, and at one point it shifts into fantasy, into fiction. That point happens very late in the game. The transition between something that's historically accurate, to something that's plausible, to something that's made up but still seems accurate, to something that's completely made up yet still sounds like it could have been real, to something that is just simple fiction and fantasy, is one of the best I've ever seen. There is no breakage, there's no point where you just get whiplash because of the sudden shift in tone, which often happens in certain games and a lot of other works of fiction. Believability. That's the key of Broken Sword. Everything in this game is to a point believable because it sets up a world that makes sense unto itself. It's similar to ours. It's very similar to our world, but it does have certain elements like a soothsayer that may actually be able to tell you the future, or a detective that believes in something called psychic analysis, where he peers into the minds of others. And the best part of it is that you never actually know if those characters are telling the truth or if they're lying or just playing crackpots. Because the game has, like I've said, a lot of colorful characters that are basically crackpots. Crazy people, insane people, and funny as hell. Also kinda stupid. For example, there's a man in the game that hospitalized himself because he suffers from a condition through which he loses consciousness for a fraction of a second several times a minute. Blinking. He is blinking. It doesn't go completely Monkey Island in terms of humor, you know, with the slapstick and the just utterly ridiculous stuff. It keeps it grounded in reality, but a crackpot sense of reality. It's not Monty Python complete insanity, it's more Faulty Towers, these people are just goddamn lunatics reality. And in that reality, there is space for serious things, there is space for drama, there is space for tragedy, there is space for day-to-day normality, and for assassins belonging to ancient secret orders that go around killing people. And of course, the Templars. The way the world is made, the way it's brought to life through its characters, through the dialogue, through, well, the motion of the animation, and to the music, to the sounds, to the voices, that's what really makes this game shine. The story, yes, the story is absolutely fantastic, and I encourage you to play it because of the story, but the world itself is well made, well put together. It has a certain feeling to it, like I've said earlier. It has an identity. Even though it's our reality, it's our world, it's not Monkey Island, it's not Melee Island, it is its own thing that has an identity. And this is something that the later games maybe didn't achieve as well, due to changes in graphics and going to 3D, changing the way the characters moved because, you know, we were in 3D, changing the way the puzzles worked, having so many of them that were just the same box puzzle in Broken Sword 3 that I felt like I was playing a Nokia mobile phone game. But the core idea is that the first game is absolutely golden. It is an unblemished piece of gaming perfection, for which they made a director's cut. Now, I'm of two opinions about this director's cut. On the one side, it lets you play as Nicole Collard in Broken Sword 1: The Shadow of the Templars, which is fantastic because she's a great character, and not being able to play as her in the first game really makes you feel like you should have, considering how big a role Nico has in the rest of the series. But the director's cut was meant to be a game for mobile platforms like the DS and the iPhone and the iPad, and it shows. It shows in the way the puzzles are designed. They're not made to be organic puzzles made to fit that world. They're puzzly puzzles, they're block puzzles, they're iPhone game, mobile game puzzles that you would see devoid of any sort of context in so many other games, where they also kind of didn't fit. Also, the new content as well doesn't really fit. Not only because the way they interconnected it in terms of story with the original is kind of bad, to the point where Nico decides to not tell George anything about what she did, what she found out, how she relates personally to the victims, to the killer, to the Templars, simply because there was no such connection in the original version. This was just added on and it feels tacked on. Also because the pacing is kind of screwed up now. The game has two beginnings, two endings. There are bits of it that just don't fit well. The entire game's flow is off. It doesn't feel as cohesive, as well paced. There's also the issue of the graphics of the game being not as good. Noticeably not as good when compared to the original hand-drawn animations. These ones just have a very low resolution compared to them for characters, and well, the scenery is nice, the scenery is still very well made. But it's just not the same kind of game because with the director's cut they changed the interface a lot. They added a notepad for characters where they write their own thoughts, which is something the original didn't have. They have a hint system, which I'm okay with. They also have portraits for the characters when they talk to each other, which at first I thought was gonna give them more expressivity, but it actually takes away from it because those portraits are barely animated and it actually takes away from the content of the original. They take away the ability to die. In Broken Sword, you could make mistakes, you could get George killed, but not in the director's cut because the portions where George could have been killed, where you could have chosen poorly, are instead just automated to the correct choice, or you're not given the choice. I even remember there being less blood in the director's cut than there used to be in the original one. And they also changed some of the puzzles, including the one with the goat, which now that they have a hint system probably wasn't the best choice. Yeah, it was an obtuse puzzle, but after so many years it became iconic. It would be like straightening the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Oh, and yeah, there was one other thing about the director's cut. As I've mentioned, you get to play as Nico, but there was a point in Broken Sword where Nico turns into Catwoman for no reason. The director's cut where you get to play as Nico doesn't explain it at all. It just doesn't. There's no added gameplay there, there's no added story there, there's just missed opportunity, which is kinda sad. Broken Sword went on to have 5 sequels, one of them being made by fans. It was called Broken Sword 2.5, I believe, Return of the Templars, and it took place in Paris again with George and Nicole, and you gotta visit a lot of the old location, and it quite honestly looks very well done. The graphics aspect at least is kinda a bit better than the director's cut with added content. The Smoking Mirror, the first official sequel, was released just a year after The Shadow of the Templars, and it was to a well-made game that sort of switched it up a bit. You weren't in Paris all the time, though to be fair, you did globetrot a lot in Shadow of the Templars too. In Smoking Mirror, you spent a lot of time in South America, dealing with issues relating to a Mayan god. The supernatural aspect was in full swing at this point. The Sleeping Dragon came 6 years later, and it had a very good story, one that I liked a lot. It related very much to the Templars, to the first game. You met a lot of old characters, you would meet some of their relatives, and were it not for the QuickTime events and the puzzles that were all about boxes, it would have been a fantastic game. Then came The Angel of Death, which returned to point and click. It wasn't as QuickTime event based and bug spottle based as Broken Sword 3, but the story did kind of neglect Nico, and it felt like it was trying to recapture the core idea of the original, but it didn't have the same spirit. It didn't have Paris. It didn't have that feeling to it that the original had. And lastly, in 2013, there was The Serpent's Curse, a kickstarted, crowdfunded Broken Sword 5, which was for the most part good, but in many aspects limited compared to the old ones, especially to the first one. So if you haven't played it before, go give Shadow of the Templars a try. You can find it right now on GOG for the price of €5.40. It is a fantastic game, and in this price you'll get the director's cut and the original as well, so you can play either one of them. I would still recommend the original because it is, well, better put together as a whole. It doesn't have as much content because there's not the Nico part where you play as her, but as a whole, as an entire game, it is closer to being perfect than it would be with the director's cut content. Also, because the original runs in ScumVM, compatibility won't be an issue with any system. You should give the entire series a go. I used to have a tradition where I would play Broken Sword, then Broken Sword 2 every year. One after another, I would set aside a week and just play them. And then to that I added Broken Sword 3 and Broken Sword 4, but by the time Broken Sword 5 came out, I did not have that tradition anymore. Maybe I should revive it. Maybe I should stream it. Maybe I don't have actually time for that anymore. Still, you should play them, you will not regret it. Thank you for watching this show. If you enjoyed it, please consider watching some of our other videos and maybe sharing them or giving a thumbs up if you feel like it. And if you really liked what you saw, please check out our Patreon page. For just $1 a month, you could help us make much better shows and get some rewards in the process. Or you could consider buying my book called Tale of Doom. Volume 1 is out now and available for just $2. And as always, if you thought it was horrible, you know where to find me and complain about it.